Welcome everyone to another chapter of Hyper-Borea. If you are enjoying this series, please share it with a friend, whether that's private message or sharing it to your social media feed. Also, remember to like and comment. I would love to hear what people are liking about the series and what people think is going to happen. Predictions are my favorite to read. The Amazon link to the book itself is in the description. Thank you everybody. Enjoy the chapter.
The fellow Doug held his glass tablet to his ear, communicating in hushed tones given Caleb and I stood in his proximity. The fellow Lance was at a distance, speaking to and comforting our two tagalongs, who had identified themselves as Jim and Stephanie. Jim had been captured outside of the tavern that the witch had assaulted. Stephanie was captured along with her family while camping. Her kids had run into the desert and had not been seen. Her husband turned into a mindless slave. It was very traumatic, the experience for both of them, in a land where few bad experiences were felt by the majority of citizens. Doug was speaking to his overseer and gave a full report. He believed, or maybe suspected, I was incapable of hearing, given his whispers and my being 5 feet away and around the van, but my enhanced senses heard it all.
We saw explosions and acted fast. Jack had woken me up. None of us realized the others hadn't brought phones. Like I said, it was fast. We made contact with Edward Green and several other people. It was weird. They were like zombies. They rushed us and we opened fire. There's a lot of dead out here, at least a couple dozen.
He was giving a low estimate, and at that he hadn't seen the carnage at our campsite. At least 150, maybe 200 were dead there.
We're with Alpha now, and one of the kids named Caleb Ballard. They're working together. No. We haven't seen or heard from Jack. MIA for 2 hours now, at least. We're going to need a lot of backup.
Doug ended his call and approached me, his face neutral. I could see a slight crease on his forehead, a partial tensing of the eyelids. He had something to tell me that he knew I would not find agreeable.
Hey, look, Mr. Sovos.
He said my name. I was used to the slow intonation at which people pronounced it, given Alphan names had fallen out of favor with larger society. It was new to them, and I appreciated his effort to pronounce it correctly, even if the effort was likely only to butter me up, as they say.
I spoke too soon. I can't let you take the van. It's got a lot of equipment that we can't just let anyone take.
I detected the man Lance approaching from behind. It was my turn to hide my features. I had seen these two fellows from the FBI procure new firearms from the vehicle, and despite my shields I had conjured around myself and Caleb, I was wanting to act quickly. I had not ever tested my shield against a bullet firing at speeds faster than sound could travel. I didn't want to gamble that I could deflect such projectiles and be wrong. Mr. Doug, that is not the deal we had agreed upon. I crossed my arms, tapping my foot in a mock gesture to feign that I was engaging in negotiations.
I know, but we have backup coming soon. Why don't we just hold out for them to get here, then we can get you a car. We know you are the only one that can stop the witch, so hear me out.
His hands were up now, in a calming manner, palms exposed.
We want to work as a team. Let's coordinate together.
Little did they know that my goal here was not necessarily the capture or killing of Gillerel, but the finding and procuring of the artifact buried in the Red Mountains. What happened to these people was unfortunately of no concern to me, my greater mission being the saving of my home. So, if it was 100 more or thousands more dead at the hands of that wicked woman, it was not my priority. Of course, I couldn't let them know this. I was too valuable alive to them if they believed, or were at least in the dark about my role to play here in stopping the Cirrus from causing further damage to the local populace. It struck me, though, as odd that these fellows were concerned so altruistically about the life or lives of not only Caleb and his friends as youth, but their general concern for the welfare of the citizenry of this society. Typically what motivated rulers and their lackeys to take care or to defend local populations of serfs or feudal peoples was the legitimacy of the king or lord's right to rule over said peoples. The welfare of each individual is only a concern for that reason. Alphmen were unique in regard to their concern for each other as common citizens, given our status as above the station of the regular Southrunners. We were set apart, a unique people in our own right, each with value. This form of nationalistic love of country and kindred gave cause for the local town guard to have genuine concern for his people. Was this the case, too, with the citizens of this vast nation? It was amazing to me to think on, given there must have been millions of them in the great city of Phoenix. With such a population, they must have strong symbols and values to unite around in order to care this deeply for each other. It was time, though, that I replied. I find this new agreement to be not agreeable, but disagreeable. I must move quickly. Time is of the essence. With each second you waste of my time, the witch grows stronger. I was speaking truth, but it was a facade for my true concern regarding time, my concern for the full moon, which I knew to be coming, Rensharo, the time limit on my quest.
I know, I thought about that. Doug continued to calm. But look, we'll be stronger together.
I simply must refuse, and I intend to honor our original deal. Remember, your friend would likely be dead if it were not for me. I referenced Lance, opening my arms. The two did not suspect that this was part of my deception. I could see Doug's eyes. I could feel the tension. He was coiling again, like a spring. Caleb, standing by me, slack-jawed, as he listened like a cow being led to slaughter, that had no idea what was happening beyond our polite conversation or negotiation. Doug shot forward in an attempt to grab my arm. I snapped, and he upended, floating into the air upside down. Another snap, and Lance was beside him. They both reached for firearms. No, no, I tossed their guns aside with a flick of my wrist, and the guns flew off into the desert. Now, I am going to honor our deal, unlike you venomous snakes. Let it be known that this day Sovos respected the oath, and the FBI sought to undermine an honorable agreement. I turned to Caleb, who was wide-eyed, apparently and unsurprisingly not predicting this turn of events, as I had suspected. Caleb, drive the van. Caleb nodded and made for the driver's side door. I moved my hands, and a creosote bush tore from the earth, and its branches separated into long cords. The bush's branches wrapped around the two men, and I lowered them to the ground, tied and unable to move like trapped pigs. Next we meet, remember that I shall not be double-crossed. I laughed at how easily I had seen this moment. I got into the van and closed the door, Caleb checking his mirrors, then driving north to Sedona.
Jack had been walking on and off for an hour, with Sean over his shoulder, losing Kyle's trail in the early desert morning. The sun was up now, deep wells of sweat pooling on his dress shirt. He had Sean on the ground then, under the shade of a juniper tree. The temperature was climbing, seemingly by the minute now that the sun was in the air. Jack rolled his sleeves up and unbuttoned a couple more buttons. He considered his options. He didn't think he was being followed, so he could go back. But what if he was wrong? He had no weapon. He had no idea when Mendoza would call in the cavalry after their report failed to reach him. He checked the G-Shock watch his wife had given him. It was barely 7:30 in the morning, still 30 minutes out from their expected check-in. That meant that in the best case, it would be a couple of hours yet. In the best case. No, Jack decided the risk was too great. He would tack north and eventually run into the highway on its way to Sedona. He had studied the maps briefly. He remembered that much about their position. The kid, who Jack didn't know was Sean, groaned from his place on the red soil. In the morning light, Jack looked him over. He was about 5'10", pudgy, and had the wisplings of a budding beard and mustache. He was the typical young adult these days, looking like he was taking his time on maturing to adulthood. Jack guessed that he worked a part-time job, lived at home with his mom, and maybe took online classes in some community college while spending far too much time on video games. The seasoned FBI agent knelt beside his rescuee and shook him gently. "Kid, wake up. Are you all right?"
Dad? He muttered. Eyes still shut tight, hand finding the back of his head. "Oh, my head." He sat up slowly, the wide branches of the juniper tree wrapped around the pair like a tent.
"What's your name, kid?"
Jack asked gently. "Sean." His eyes blinked as he kept rubbing his head. "Sean Cooper." His eyes shot open then, and he looked around. "Sylvia? Kyle?" Sean, Sylvia, and Kyle. Jack made a mental note of the names.
"It's okay. They got away too."
Sean looked at Jack, as if for the first time, his memory coming back to him now. "You're with the FBI?"
"Yeah, I'm Jack Callahan, special investigator with the Phoenix, Arizona division of the FBI. Come on, let's walk and talk. I don't know if those things are still following us."
He put his hand out, and after a moment of sizing him up, Sean reluctantly took it. Not for lack of trust of the man, but Sean did seem to be in genuine pain. "Weren't there 3 of you last night?" Sean asked, appearing to piece together in his mind the events of a few hours before.
"Yeah," Jack affirmed. "We've been following you 4 after you left a dead body at the bar."
Sean turned ghost white. I...
Jack chuckled. "Don't worry, kid. I don't think you're going down for murder. There's something else going on here. We saw the zombies. The security footage shows you were under attack."
Jack felt bad. He knew what he was doing. He was working the kid, gaining his trust. He needed information on Alpha, and to get that, he needed trust. They had cameras? Oh, thank God. Sean's walk was staggered at first, with a stumble here and there, but he straightened out as they kept going, working their way north. How did the guy's head outside the bar explode? Jack probed, wondering if this was too far, wondering if the question would put Sean on the defense and shut him up. It was a risk, this whole conversation. Jack had many tools in his kit. Threats, both judicial and faux physical. Promises, playing off his subject's ignorance of the system. Jack figured he would bait out a little pieces of information at a time. His strategy to see if Sean would slip up enough to where he had given away so much information that giving up the rest of the goat did not seem like a major jump. Jack needed to know everything about what was going on, and Alpha seemed to be driven, seemed to have a purpose. Jack theorized that maybe this college kid had just enough to where they could predict the wizard's next move, predict where the next showdown would be, find both of the magic users, and cut them off at their next collision. It all hinged on this first question. How would Sean react? You are not going to believe this. You are not going to believe any of this. Sean's mouth opened, and a torrent of information came out. Like 3 days ago, I was just walking home from the bus stop after work over by South Mountain. Sean explained his first meeting with the wizard, who named himself Sovos, how he had thought that he had been being stalked by a homeless man and didn't want to get shanked. He then went on to describe their first interaction in his bedroom, the magic he revealed in the day after where they discussed and questioned each other's backgrounds and societies. Sovos really seemed to be from another time and place. Atlantis, according to him. I've seen him turn into birds, cats, dogs. He trained us in sword combat. He can fly. He can make us levitate. He can shoot fire, ice, lightning. He can even slow down time. Jack's face was stoic, but with hints of a smile, so as not to slow the ramblings of Sean from his in-depth history of the past days. I couldn't believe how similar to Skyrim some of the stuff he told me was, and some of the pictures he pulled up on Google. The guy literally comes from a place like Skyrim. You know Skyrim, right? The Dragonborn? He said we could be like the Dragonborn. Jack did not know much about the game, besides that Mendoza was secretly obsessed with it after his son got him to play. The seasoned FBI agent turned over all the information in his mind as Sean droned on about his video game. A real-life wizard. So, magic really was real. He considered the consequences, the first-order questions. Could other people do magic? Was it just hiding this whole time? What did the kid say? A ritual had brought Sovos here? Could he teach others how to do magic? Was this going to be a daily fact of life in just a few years? If Sovos died or went home, would his magic go with him? Did the FBI have the resources to quash this thing? To keep it from hitting the mainstream? To keep people from knowing and freaking out? He would have to be careful with all of this. He was glad that Mendoza had seen the security footage from the bar. Otherwise, no one would ever believe them. Jack almost didn't believe it himself. He needed Sovos' next steps. He needed to focus the kid. Sean, what was the word you said? It had to do with Sovos' quest. Rensharo? Yeah, Sean exclaimed. Rensharo is a spell they cast to come here. They used a magical artifact for the first time to amplify the strength of the ritual. Basically, there's this prophecy that Atlantis is to be destroyed by her own people, and that they will be scattered. Sovos came here to stop his enemies from destroying his home by looking for an artifact here. An artifact is apparently like a really strong magical weapon or tool. He said that this witch, Gil-Ruel, followed him to try and stop him. He has until the full moon to find the artifact, and they both will return home then. Jack tried to remember how close they were to the full moon. He had glanced up at the moon last night while looking at the stars. In Phoenix, the haze of the massive city's lights blocked out most star cover, so whenever he got out of town, he always made sure to look up. He couldn't remember, though. Okay, so he's after a magical artifact, and he thinks it's in Sedona. Yeah, Sean said. Think about it. Sedona is like a land of vortexes, healing energy, and mystery, right? That's what my sister and Mom always say, anyway. Right. Jack pondered that as they climbed up a slope and through some creosote bushes. They had arrived at the highway. Hold that thought, kid. Jack pulled his badge from out of his shirt, it hanging on a chain. He held it up as cars came down the highway in a line, traffic heading towards Sedona for a weekend getaway. There was a lot of traffic. What had the kid said? Jack thought on his words. Vortexes, crystals, and mystery. This was the weirdest case he had ever been assigned. I massaged my thighs as the van navigated the bustling streets of Sedona. I was informed by Caleb, and by my recollection of what I had read on the computer, that most of this traffic would be tourists. They had come from many distant lands to see the red rocks looming in the near distance. beautiful and commanding. We were surrounded by geological wonders, appearing larger and more grand than the pictures I had seen on the internet. In the moment, we were both starving, Caleb and I needed a way to make us some money to procure currency for lodging. We were dead tired, too, the night's activities weighing on us. Caleb was oddly quiet. When I probed him about this, he insisted he was just tired. I believed him. His eyes were blinking much, deep bags under each. I lay a hand on his shoulder a couple of times to encourage him, secretly working a little magic into his muscles to invigorate them. My mind turned to our problem. How could I make some money here? We had already passed by a couple of shops advertising palm readings, psychic services, and magic crystals. I was weary of anything the society claimed to possess magical powers or abilities after my trip to the Target store and my sampling of the alleged magic disappearing potion. Nonetheless, as we turned through a roundabout, I ordered Caleb to pull off the road and navigate the car into a parking spot, as he called it. He obliged, and I fixed my eyes on one of the crystal shops. Crystal Magic, the sign read. Perfect. I should be able to find a payer for my services there. Caleb, watch the van, and my back. I will go in there and make us some money.
Wait, when do we go back for Kyle, Sean, and Sylvia? He interrupted my thought process as I was about to open the door. I had thought about that already and gave my conclusion aloud. They will go north to meet us here in Sedona. We will need to have a safe place to receive them. Once we have lodging and provisions, I will take the form of a bird to search for them.
Okay, he nodded, assured by my confidence.
I could use a cheeseburger and a nap.
Caleb's response was as expected. Wordlessly, I exited the van and made my way carefully through the parking lot, weary of being struck by one of the thankfully slow-moving cars. The building was of fine craftsmanship, like all buildings I had seen in Sedona. The color was not too bold, earthy tones to match the surrounding environment. Everything here was well manicured. The city, though traditions and materials foreign to me, screamed of wealth in high society. The Crystal Magic Store, in particular, was part of a larger building with individual shops like caves occupying or carved out of the larger space. Glass windows stretched the length of the outer walls, advertising finely crafted products. Aura Photos, an A-frame sign advertised just outside of my destination. $45 was the charge. Steep. More than 7 times the cost of my jeweled slippers. That was a good omen. These people may pay a premium for true magic. As I had stopped to inspect the advertisement for aura reading, I was passed by several women, as they spoke and giggled entering the shop. The city of Sedona was bustling with people of all types. A steady flow of foot traffic made its way in and out of the shop, all smiles. I stepped through the finely made glass doorway, my magical detection sense on, my gaze steering left and right, up and down as I stood static in the threshold. I saw nothing out of the ordinary. Interesting. How could such a place be filled with people if there were not truly magical energies associated with these stones? What drew them here? I walked amongst the patrons as they swamped the tables. Each table seemed to have a different theme. Some had stones of a pyramid shape, others had spheres. Some were rough in their forms, appearing to be geodes, just broken open and polished. Others were very well manicured. Everything was either bright white or exotic in shade. Earth tones be damned. I passed by a clerk, her apron giving her away. She had green hair and large circular spectacles. She was explaining a product to a patron, and I busied myself with a milky white orb as I eavesdropped. Tourmaline and obsidian are traditionally used to combat negativity. These definitely benefit from a recharge after a while. She explained the faux magic to the naive patron. Smoke and good intentions can be enough to wring the energy it has soaked up out, but nothing is more cleansing than bathing your stones in the light of the full moon. I could not judge these lay people in their imaginative efforts to realize some magic in their lives. They were not entirely wrong in their practice. I myself use stones and pebbles often, imbuing them with different spells to act as wards. Though a humble piece of gravel could be used, I did not need these extremely finely polished pretty rocks. The clerk dismissed the patron with a well-practiced farewell, and then moved to return to her place behind the counter. I approached once she had arrived at her predetermined location and caught her drinking from a metal bottle of water. "Pardon me," I greeted. "Yes," she corked her bottle and politely stepped closer, the counter between us glass, displaying many more crystals, large and small. Some fine crystal jewelry in the form of rings and pendants. "I was curious if you or your master here knew of any employment for a man experienced in charging crystals and stones." The woman chuckled. The woman chuckled, then her face grew serious but polite as she realized I was not jesting. Oh, well, we're not hiring here at the moment. I looked to her uniform, an apron stitched with the name of the shop. It dawned on me that perhaps she was misunderstanding the length of the window of employment I was seeking. I'm an experienced charger, or imbuer of stones. I can place any spell in them that you can conceive of. I'm not looking for a contract of months or even days, just a couple of hours of work. Oh, well, again, I know we're not hiring for any term of employment at this moment. I can direct you to another shop if you would like. She reached for a glass screen in her pocket, but I held up my hand in a physical motion indicating I would like another attempt at my request. A demonstration, I smiled to calm her. From my pocket I removed a piece of gravel. I imbued a spell of levitation into it, and placed it on the glass counter. I already knew the answer to my question, but I ask anyway. Do you have any magical ability, the talent for casting? The employee narrowed her eyes then. Well, I do charge all of my own moon crystals, and I do meditate and cast spells of bounty and resilience. Then this should work for you. Come, do as I do. I removed another piece of gravel and placed it on the counter. Holding the imbued rock, I flicked my other hand out, and manipulated the air with my finger movements. The piece of gravel on the counter quaked, then rose into the air. I spun it in circles, quickly, then slowly, then quickly again. I made it flip, then brought it back to rest on the glass. The rest of the employees of the store and the patrons about me none the wiser, too focused on the pretty colors on the tables to notice true magic happening before their eyes. The employee with green hair before me clapped excitedly. How did you do that? She looked my hands over and saw no strings, no tricks. Seriously, her demeanor grew more skeptical and curious. How did you do that? Her gaze of amazement shifted to the other pebble, and her mind worked as she wondered at her ability in the face of mine. I chuckled now. I told you truth. I am a master of magics and I can imbue a multitude of spells. The clerk kept her eye on my person then, but pulled free a key from her pocket and opened the display case an inch. From inside she grabbed a small cube of stone and placed it in front of me. Again it was polished black, about an inch by an inch. If you really are magic, turn this black stone white. I hefted the rock. Its smooth, cold sides felt good in my hand. Then I placed it back on the glass, delicately, with 2 fingers. My hand rose a foot above it, and I snapped, the color changing instantly to white. The employee gasped. How do I do it? Can you teach me? She was excited, her eyes light with curiosity and glee. I knew that she would never be able to. She did not possess an ounce of the talent. Otherwise I would have detected it on her. But nonetheless I stated truthfully, if you have the ability to cast magic truly, you will be able to do as I have done, with my imbued rocks. She immediately retrieved her glass device from her pocket. Can you meet me in the back of the shop in 30 minutes? I nodded my assent, eager to make some money. Okay, I definitely have some friends who would be interested. She typed away on her glass device. I'll see you there. I exited the store and returned to the van, during the walk pondering how much I should charge. They had fake magic that demanded ridiculous prices. Could I not do the same for my real magic? At the van, Caleb was sleeping in the driver's seat, dozed off with mouth open and drool spilling forth. I opened the passenger door and looked at the time on the vehicle's clock. It was 9:30. At 10 I would make my way to the back of the store. In the meantime I audited my ingredients bag. I would not imbue each rock with much of anything beyond what I could show off. Even so, these people could not cast at all, so I need not necessarily imbue the rocks with anything. Though I did not want to feel overly dishonest. 1 second worth of channeling would suffice. Then I could say without a guilty conscience that I truly was handing over a magically infused stone. I had sufficient in my bag, but insufficient should I have to fight a battle at the scale of the night before. Given Gilurel likely ran off with just her champion, I didn't have a great fear that would happen soon. As well, we were in the relative safety of this large population. Who would dare attack us now, when law enforcement by the town guard would come to our aid? Certainly not Gilurel. I fought the urge to join Caleb in a nap, but we did not have the time, and I did not want to be groggy when selling my wares, so I stayed up. A couple of minutes before the designated meeting time, I scrawled on a piece of paper that I had found in the compartment immediately to my front the details of my meeting, and placed them on the wheel in front of my sleeping subordinate, so he shouldn't wake and come looking for me. I walked the opposite direction to the other end of the modular building and skirted around the back, where minimalist doors and gates that looked to be for the use of trucks to load and unload merchandise were fixed in the wall. I believed my suspicion to be correct as the doors and gates were spaced at intervals approximately the distance of shop between shop. At the rear of where I approximated the crystal store to be, there was a crowd of about 8 people. They were of all different colors, ages, and genders. I addressed the employee from earlier. Am I to assume these are all folks who are looking to pay for my services? An eager fellow with a beard, long hair and a ponytail, and tan skin from a life lived in the sunlight stepped forward.
Wait. Can we see a demonstration like you showed Becky?
I nodded, but of course. I pulled out several rocks from my bag, each about the size of the cube from earlier. I dropped them to the ground, each landing on the asphalt, as Seaman had taught me it was called. I could not be mocked for believing it to be smooth, dried tar. I levitated the stones from the ground and made them fly in all manner of elaborate arcs and patterns. I then changed their colors, lit them on fire, and made them shoot into the air, then return. After this display, everyone in the group was holding out money, speaking rapidly and excitedly. Invisibility, one asked. Mind reading, another. Love spell. Fireballs. Strength. Healing. I imbued a stone for each, temporarily showing its power before handing it over to the customer. I charged $100 a stone, and the 8 eagerly paid me. Despite my protests, I insisted that one had to possess magical abilities before they could use the stone. But each one of them confidently asserted that they were witches or warlocks, or just had the inner ability. One, claiming to be a Viking, requested a stone to make him invincible. I gave him one that would toughen his skin. I will give you $1,000 cash if you can give me a stone that will prevent me from aging, one woman practically screamed in my face. I asked if 5 years would do, and she nodded eagerly, accepting the stone and forking over the cash. Okay, I have, drained my abilities for the day, I stated, preparing a spell of vanishing in my mind in case the customers would not let me go. They were hungry in their eyes. They looked me over not as a man, but as a tool to advance their desires. I had run into many villagers like this, many lords and kings. They witnessed my power in their vain ambitions, and in their vain ambitions colluded in their own minds how I could be manipulated and used to advance their agendas. Many were eager to pay, of course, large sums. Others wanted what I had to offer for free and were willing to use threats and violence to achieve these means. That never ended well for them. Wait, you can't go, said one, a glass communicator device pressed into her ear. Yeah, he's real. Becky's text was real. She looked to me after speaking into the device, pulling it from her ear slightly as she said to me, I have more friends coming. They want to buy spells too.
Hey man, the one with long hair and a beard petitioned me. Could I get your phone number or something? I'll definitely want to buy more when I get my next paycheck.
No, I do not possess a telephone, I replied, and the audience gasped louder than when I had showed them my magic. I must be going now. My subordinate is waiting. I turned to leave and felt a tug on my sleeve.
Wait!
It was a skinny fellow. He saw my eyes narrow, and he recoiled as I scowled at him for touching me. It wasn't my first instinct to be cruel, abrasive, or intimidating, but even a small crowd like this needed to be manipulated to keep them from trying to have their way with me. He backed up a step, stuttering. He knelt then, bowing low. I wish to serve you, Master Wizard. He looked up to my eyes from his position on the asphalt. It didn't shock me, his gesture. As I had stated before, I had had many villagers in backwater towns swear their fealty to me. I was worshipped as a god in some fiefdoms. It was not a surprise to me that Seaman and his friends would join me on my quest, and others would seek the same. As I had stated, this was a society hungry for adventure, hungry to escape their mundane, comfortable environment, to be tested into adventure. This scrawny skeleton of a man was most certainly at a point in his life where he was depressed, bored with his work, and looking for more. I could not furnish his request, as I liked to keep my team small. He would not take this "no" I was to give him for an answer. He would pursue me, whether it be immediately after this exchange or later. I would see him and his like again. I want to serve you too. Another fell to her knees. I want to learn the magic arts, and I can pay, she supplicated herself. It was time for me to go. I am flattered, truly. You all have much to offer, I am sure. But I am traveling, and my team is very small for that cause. Now go and meditate on your spells, and try to muster any ounce of magical talent you have in yourselves. 'Twas a pleasure doing business with each of you. I turned once more to leave, once more hearing, Wait! I turned to again, this time intending to use my vanishing spell to free myself from this rabble. Another 2 had fallen to a kneel, and I was taken back in time by way of memory to a small village on the coast of the great sea that separates the tribes of the northern climes from the land of Egypt. I had been on the coast looking for whisperings or rumors of new magical persons or creatures. It was in remote towns that local casters liked to set up shop and carry out their experiments or work. Typically, these individuals were far and few between, but some did possess novel methods, if not entirely new schools of magic, though that was rare. The coast was rocky, the people mostly fishermen, with a few tradesmen who built the town's rough shacks. A man like a primitive blacksmith was crafting tools of bronze. I spoke with the medicine man when I came into town, the people lingering close by to listen in, wondering of rumors and tales from the outer world. This was a small band, not possessing fine roads or horses or the ability to fly. Thus they were remote and unused to visitors. They likely all knew each other by name. Just the difference between that civilization and young Saman's was staggering, something I did not think possible without magic. But anyways, the medicine man told me of no unusual happenings. There are only myths surrounding the sea, not uncommon for fisherfolk, strange beasts washing up on the shore, strange creatures seen in the waves at night. Nothing much to go on. I was invited to a feast that evening, and my belly rumbled. Not desiring to hunt and looking to relax from my journeying, I agreed to wait as it was prepared. As the guest of honor, I showed off many spells to the crowd. The village had only 100 or 200 persons. They all clapped and cheered boisterously at each display. The medicine man's eyes grew wider and wider as I carried on my show. I incorporated more and more use of the sea into my spells, pulling fish from the waves and manipulating large bubbles of water above the ground in which they swam freely. With the light of the torches and bonfire, this was a glorious display as the flames played off the water crystal blue. I climaxed the event with a spell that fished forth several dozen fish from the sea, stacking them neatly on a pile for the people to scramble after and beat into the ground until they lay still. This would feed them for a few days. Unwittingly, I had fulfilled in the medicine man's eyes a series of promised prophecies passed down from generation to generation for what would happen when the supposed sea god arrived. The medicine man rose, silencing the audience and declaring my prophetic mantle. He bowed deep and reverently, supplicating himself on his knees, and the couple hundred of villagers followed suit. In their eyes I could see a type of loyalty that Gilurel and her zombies could never achieve. This was the frenzied loyalty of zealots. They, with the proper motivation, would walk into the waters and drown if I commanded it. Willingly, to serve. It was disturbing. I had heard of masters who cultivated such followings, and had even heard of some farther east doing just that, living on high mountains and visiting the populace to occasionally take willing or unwilling women as wives or sacrifices. What was that one fellow's name? He was dead by now, but he had cultivated quite the mythos. Zez, Jesh, Zu, Zeus? I didn't recall. He had an affinity for lightning, however. "Master Wizard?" someone asked my attention, and it brought me back to the present. The small crowd in front of me awaited an answer with bated breath. I knew that I needed to leave, but I did not want them to come after me. What to tell them? Inspired then, I waved my hand in the air, and an ethereal blue dragon appeared before them, about a foot in height and diameter. It was plain in design, easy to cast. "This is my symbol." I was making this up. "There will be a day when I will need you and your friends. You will be handsomely rewarded for coming to my aid. Look for this symbol. I will cast it in the sky with a scale so immense none shall miss it." There was eager nodding and excitement in the small group. One began to form a question, but I cut him off. "Goodbye, my loyal servants." I snapped and vanished before their eyes. I jogged to the van, as an invisible man, snapping again and scaring Caleb, who was awake at the driver's seat. Entering the vehicle, I laughed to myself and spread our riches across the dashboard. "Who did you rob?" Caleb looked around frantically. "Rob? I am no thief." Typical of one who lacks industry to immediately draw the conclusion that success at one's art is a fraud, and the only way to garner resources is through nefarious means. "I'll have you know I came by this money honestly. Now, start driving before my patrons come looking for me." I realized the irony of my orders as Caleb navigated us out of the parking lot and back to the main thoroughfare. "Where to now?" Caleb asked. "First, let us find some new clothes for you." I looked down at Caleb's blood-stained t-shirt and camouflaged pants. "Then we shall have a feast and check into an inn. After a nap, we shall find our friends." Caleb nodded. "Yeah," his stomach growled. "I guess I don't want to have to explain why there's pieces of brain stuck to me while we eat our burritos." Kyle fell to one knee, mouth and throat parched and dizziness setting in. He knew this was the start of heat stroke and dehydration. It was close to noon and the sun was high, Sylvia largely unresponsive so far. The firefighter's son stood carefully, avoiding cactus as he continued on toward a large juniper tree he had spotted. He lay Sylvia down gently and all but collapsed against the trunk of the warped desert shrub that had grown magnificently tall. Kyle had been what he would call hiking, but was closer to stumbling and shambling the last few hours in a northeast direction since he had escaped the witch's zombies. Between him and Sean's sister, they had no water or cell phones. In the rush of the moment in the night, it seemed they both had been too distracted to think of those phones which normally never seemed to be out of their reach. He thought on them now, sitting by their sleeping bags in their tents. Despite that, Kyle was glad to be alive, glad Sylvia was breathing, but he didn't know how much longer they would be without water out in this terrain. Sylvia coughed, and Kyle almost fell over, lunging to her side. He gathered his best friend's sister in his arms and pleaded with her. "Come on, Sylv, wake up." Dad?" she muttered, almost indiscernible. "Sylv, it's me, Kyle." "Kyle?" Her eyes blinked, and she smiled. It was a precious moment for Kyle. Even if they were both filthy, sweaty, and covered in red dirt, he found her smile to be so beautiful. "Yeah, Kyle." He was so happy she was awake. She was okay. He hoped for their sake she could walk. Her smile faded quickly as her hand found the spot where she had been smacked by the oversized ghoul. "I hope Sovos kills that Frankenstein with an explosive spell next time we see him." "Last week, did you ever think you'd say something like that?" Kyle asked, the unreality of their past 24 hours not lost on him. They both laughed for a minute, and it felt good to do so. After the revelry died down, Sylvia looked to Kyle for a quiet moment. Then, as if realizing for the first time she was in his arms, she blushed, and awkwardly made a stand. "How long was I out?" "Slowly," Kyle cautioned, standing and blushing with her as well. "You slept in. Come on, let's try and walk and I'll fill you in." They half walked, half limped their way through the desert, as Kyle probed to see what Sylvia could remember, which was quite a bit, up until she was knocked unconscious. The firefighter's son described the law enforcement officers intervening, and in the chaos, him escaping. He emphasized that Sean was alive, but didn't know if he was captured or not. Upon hearing her brother's name, Sylvia stopped and turned around. "We have to go back." "Sylvia, wait!" Kyle tried to stop her, but she kept on. "I can't lose him. He'll never make it without me." She called as she walked and half stumbled the way they had come. "Sylvia, who knows if they'll still even be there? I have to try." Kyle jogged after her then and grabbed her arm. "Try? There were over 20 of those zombies left, and the big one. We don't have food, water, or our phones." "I don't care." Sylvia jerked her arm free. "You always grab my arm, but you can't stop me, Kyle. I lost my dad, and I'm not losing my brother too." She was sobbing then, pressing forward. Kyle stood there, dumbfounded, at a loss for words. He jogged after her a second time, the effort nearly draining him. "Sylvia, I'm lost. I wouldn't even know how to get back if we wanted to." He was telling the truth, but would have never admitted it had their lives not depended on it. She turned and was in his arms again, crying. "Sovos will find him. Sovos and Caleb. The guys who tried to save us were firing guns at the zombies. They had to have heard them." "Do you promise?" Sylvia asked. "I promise," he comforted, stroking the back of her matted hair. After another moment, she composed herself and looked around. "It's hot." They both chuckled, the tension easing. "Yeah," Kyle agreed. "Let's walk. I think this way's north." "Are you sure? Worst case we die." Sylvia shrugged, and they laughed again. "Here, take a seat, kid." Jack motioned toward a wooden chair as they entered the detective's office. They were in the main campus of the Sedona Police Department. Agent Callahan remembered reading about this small force in a summary of the state's law enforcement capabilities. Just under 30 sworn officers in less civilian positions. In fact, Jack was pretty sure Detective Megan, who was generously allowing them to use his office, was one of only 2 detectives. "Don't have to ask me twice. Wake me up when we're going to go look for my friends." Sean sat down in a heap and crossed his arms. The hikers who had picked them up had offered water bottles and granola bars. Sean proceeded to eat all of them. Jack recalled that fact as he ate a handful of Skittles out of a jar on Detective Megan's desk. He grabbed the phone and dialed the FBI office in Phoenix, then navigated the prompts until he was speaking with a real human being, then was tossed into the waiting queue, listening to elevator music while Mendoza may or may not have been walking over to answer his call. "Jack, what the heck?" It was more of a statement than a question, an order like, "You are going to tell me everything, right now," and Jack was, and did. "Donahue called. He and the rookie are battered, but alive. A sheriff's deputy found them tied up in a creosote bush because they tried to double-cross the dang wizard." The lieutenant breathed in. "Oh, crap. Let me lower my voice before we have to break out more NDAs for the entire office."
What's my next move? You got one of the kids? Yes, sir. Hold him there. Doug is getting patched up at a small clinic in western Sedona. Once he and Lance have the sign-off, they are going to meet you at the station. Doug will babysit the kid. He's in rough shape. You and Lance will be on the street. I need that wizard found. I talked to the police chief and the sheriffs of Maricopa, Coconino, and Yavapai counties. They're sending backup. You all are going to manhunt this son of a gun out of whatever rock he's hiding under and capture him if he comes willingly. If he puts up a fight, leverage the kid. Yes, sir. HRT, Michael Mendoza was referring to the FBI's hostage rescue team, an elite militarized unit of highly trained operators. Basically, the world's most elite SWAT team. We'll be there in 2 hours, flying into Sedona Airport. You'll be working with their captain, Jeffrey Holcomb. This is the most serious operation of our lives, Callahan. You know that. Yes, sir. Jack knew what was expected of him. Not only that this event was a career maker or breaker, it had potential to upend the world, as everyone knew it. It was unprecedented in law enforcement history. This is not to be repeated. The sheriff's deputies found over 200 bodies in that wash. Hard to tell exactly. Most of them were in pieces. Jesus. Jack fell into Detective Megan's office chair. Yeah, the weirdest part? No IDs yet, but a lot of the corpses seem to have been exhumed from a graveyard in Cottonwood. They fit the total count the police there report were missing as of yesterday. I don't need to remind you again that this is serious. The president will get involved at some point. This is going to be everywhere, and the nation will be watching. Secure the kid, wait for relief from Doug, then hit the streets. Mendoza out. Jack let the dial tone buzz in his ear for a moment as he chewed over his boss's words. Over 200 dead. That was over half of the state's annual deaths by homicide, in one night. He recalled the explosions. Is that what did it? Was it the wizard's spells? This was crazy. Jack thought on the media coverage, but remembered his boss's orders to keep tight-lipped. He needed to call his wife and let her know things were okay, but to brace. He hung up Detective Megan's landline and tried to recall his wife's number off the top of his head and failed. He needed a computer. He could log into Facebook and message her to call him. The terminal in front of him required a password. He would have to go get that. Jack stood and walked to the door, turning and remembering Sean, who was fast asleep, snoring, his mouth open, drool dripping down his chin. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of handcuffs and secured the kid to the chair. Stay put, he told the sleeping prisoner, and left the office. I was impressed by the inn, though Caleb instructed me that they were more commonly referred to as hotels. It sat on an outcropping of red rock within the city, but over a creek. The creek itself was given a wide berth by the city at large, the greenery cutting through the structures and roads like a green knife through butter. This establishment was close to the creek, which favored my ingredient-gathering prospects. We had arrived with bellies full of delicious burritos from an establishment called Juan Berto's. Caleb was completely clean as well, after changing into some new clothing purchased from a local dealer. Now, with the lad's help, we paid the fare for a 2-night stay, the room coming with 2 queen-size beds. I was curious what that meant to a society of this scale and technological wealth. Would the bed fit for a queen occupy the breadth of the room? Would it be made of gold, with all kinds of mechanical magic heating the sheets and massaging my tired muscles? Perhaps an automated bedpan and servant lad to remove it from your presence immediately following issue? The building itself was very in keeping with the city as a whole. The walls were stone, painted the color of rust with hues of green accenting the many plants both inside and out. A water feature dominated the courtyard, it being an imitation of the creek in the lush depression dissecting the city. Caleb tugged on my sleeve as I took time to peer into the faux creek, on the lookout for what drove the water forward, and seeing pipes therein. Were this my first time seeing this day and age, I would have assumed there were an army of slaves assigned to pump the water, taking regularly intervaled shifts to power the fake creek, but I knew from experience that this creek was likely using an automated pump. I was disappointed upon entering our assigned room to see that the queen-size beds were just slightly larger than young Samon's bed back in the grand city of Phoenix. None of the mechanical features I had hypothesized were present. Pity. Caleb, let us rest our tired bones for a spell, say an hour or 2. Then we will gather supplies and begin our search for your friends. I was just thinking. Caleb dropped his small satchel on the bed he was claiming as his, notably the farthest from the window,
Was he putting me toward the access point of potential assassins? Will you make these thoughts known to me, or must I read your mind again? Wait, what do you mean, again? I paused. I definitely needed my rest, my weary brain, for some time. Definitely needed to rest my weary brain for some time. Ignore me. 'Twas a jest. Do you think the FBI keeps, a tracker on their van? What is this tracker? A hunter of some kind? Like how phones have trackers on them, like you can use a computer to see where they are at all times? So, I said this slowly, so as not to confuse young Caleb, the foolish runt. You mean to tell me that the organization who double-crossed us and means to capture us, and means to question us regarding the deaths of 100, nay 200 individuals, you mean to say that they have the capability to electronically track our movements and discern our location through your mobile glass communicator and the vehicle which we stole from them? Caleb stared at me, connecting the dots in his mind. Yeah. May I see your device? I held my hand out, not asking necessarily, but demanding. Yeah, are you going to block the tracker with a spell? He naively asked. Yes, something like that. I held the device in my hands and walked to the window. It was large, the size of 2 doors, and I found the latch, opening the entire window horizontally. I stepped out onto a balcony overlooking the beautiful creek below and the towering red rock mountains above. It was not on my mind that below them lay my prize. In this moment I was too weary. My mind focused on the task at hand. Do you have to be outside for the spell to work? Caleb had trailed me to the sliding window. Yes, I stated flatly. Mustering a spell, I tossed the phone in the air, then slapped the air in front of my face and sent the communicative device like a cannonball flying through the air. It soared out of eyesight to the other end of the creek and into a neighborhood beyond. Yo, that was not cool. Wordlessly, I left the hotel room then, careful to bring with me a plastic card which I saw Caleb use to open the lock on the room's door. I descended the steps into the courtyard, casually smiling and nodding to fellow patrons of the inn as I walked. It was back inside the lobby next, and across tiled floors and pictures of grand views of the same mountains that one had simply to walk outside to view. I found my way to the parking lot and navigated to the van. I had the same plan for the vehicle as the glass communicator, though I would make sure it did not fly so far as to kill a pedestrian or demolish a home. I walked to the spot we had left it, and prepared myself a much stronger spell. I realized that it was not ideal for the traffic about the lot, both on foot and in cars, to witness this somewhat heinous defilement of nature I was about to commit. I looked this way and that, finding a very bushy shrub that was a part of an ensemble of manicured vegetation giving some life to the otherwise plain tarred lot. I broke a branch off and assumed the form of the bush. Much like when I transform into an animal or bird, I was now a shrub. Typically, for masters of lower ability, maintaining this form would be a spell in and of itself, but I am, as you dear reader know, an exceptional talent. My weariness hung onto my every move, my eyelids heavy and my muscles starting to feel sore. I had seen enough exploded corpses and battered bodies from our commandeering that jeep in the desert. Given these circumstances, I took an extra measure to check left, then right. Do not think too hard about how this is done, as a bush. It just is. Satisfied that no pedestrians were approaching, I began to cast. A subtle shake of one of my long, woody limbs, with a leaf flickering like a finger, and the van we had procured from the law enforcement fellows who had foolishly tried to betray me rose into the air. It hovered a moment before I sent it flying across the sky and into the canyon and creek below. Due to the silence of the levitation, none appeared to notice, but several families and individuals alike turned heads upon hearing the crash and explosion. It was momentary, the distance being sufficient to muffle it. I was satisfied that none were suspect, my disguise working, and I assumed my regular form. It was a quick walk back to the room, though I overheard a couple of hotel employees speculating on the small fire below next to the creek. Inside the room was Caleb, soundly asleep. I drew the curtains on the window and bathed myself quickly, using the shower, a fine invention. Clean, warm, and belly full from earlier, I found myself under the covers in the dark room. Sleep found me quickly.